Hey, it's Aaron, and today I want to talk about the new 2025 RZR Pro Series from Polaris. I went to Oregon to ride these. I got to ride all three models. So this is the new series based on Polaris's racing machines. It's an all new design for this UTV. There are three models that I just mentioned that, didn't I? Yeah. So there's three models. There's the XP, the S, and the R. The R being the most powerful, the XP being the least. But there's other differences as well in terms of what they're used for. So just to kind of run that down, the XP is a thinner track, so it's a little more for technical riding, especially in like woodlands and places like that where you need to be a little more narrow to get through the obstacles you're going for. The S is kind of in between the two ends, so I'll talk about that one last. The R is the fastest, most powerful of the group and is really made for sand, hard dirt, beaches, things like that. It shined in Oregon while we were there. And then the S is halfway between those two. So it's in build very similar to the R, but with a less powerful engine and a little more of an all-around kind of all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, whatever you want to call it, system. So it kind of can do both things. It's just not specialized in either one of those. So that's kind of the gist of the lineup. So big changes that happened this year in terms of overall for all of these machines. The bodywork is a lot different. The framing has been changed, so it's a little more robust. They did a lot more in terms of keeping it more solid, so it has less flex, which improves safety, of course, but also lightens it up and gives it a more stable design. And then the old Polaris hallmarks are back, so the thin kind of eyebrow over the lights, and the comes down to almost a fang mouth in the front and stuff. Those things are back. The modular system in the back for the cargo, that remains the same, but some of those older things will not fit on the newer one just because of size. So it's not quite as wide, I think is how it works, but I don't remember for sure. It's one of those, it's either too narrow or too wide. It's one of those things. But otherwise, these are almost all the same. Now, the top end Pro R gets the Polaris's 2-liter 4-cylinder engine. You'll see that same engine in different tuning in things like the Slingshot, which I've talked about before. So it's a 225 horsepower engine, which is nuts. It has a very wide RPM band, but it produces that power for a large chunk of it. It is a super powerful machine, to the point where when we were racing these on the beach, just kind of doing back and forth, so we weren't like racing each other, we were just running back and forth doing sprints. I still had throttle left. I was afraid to go faster than I was already going. I hit about 90 miles an hour and was like, I don't feel safe going faster than this. That's how nuts the amount of power this thing has. Now in the sand and in the in the dunes and in the slightly technical things that we were doing, and the hard riding that we were doing, it was phenomenal because more power is usually a good thing, and it was power to the ground with this. The feet plant really well. There's still that button to make that happen. There was a lot of really good things to say about that particular model. But out of the three, I actually liked the S the best, because for me personally, I like to off-road, and I like to off-road in different places and under different conditions. And so I would like a machine that's a little more well-rounded for that. That's not to say the Pro R is bad, it's just to say that for me personally, the Pro S is the better machine. The XP was really good, but comparatively, it just felt dead on the throttle. And my other big complaint with those two versus the Pro R is the transmission. It's still the same Polaris transmission where you really got to yank and be positive about shoving it into gear. There were a couple of times where it did not go into gear, especially in the XP, and you know that sucks. On the R, it's a new transmission and it's butter smooth, super smooth. So it was just so easy to move that lever and make it feel it just go in. You didn't have to yank, you didn't have to, you know, you get in the habit of, if you've ridden Polaris, you get in the habit of you push it down to drive and then you smack it to make sure it's in drive. Yeah, it's just that transmission is super clunky. Also very loud. The newer transmission is not nearly as loud when you're letting it slow the machine down. So sort of doing that engine brake or whatever, you know, to go down a incline or something. It's not nearly as loud with the new one as it was on the old one. There's a lot of changes. That newer transmission will, I think, eventually trickle down to other Polaris machines. I think right now it's just cost, and then because it's new, they kind of want to try it out. So in terms of size, there are differences. These machines are a little bit larger than their predecessors. The Pro R, which replaces the Turbo R, if you remember that one. So the Pro R is 74 inches in track width. It's or in vehicle width, sorry, not track width. Track width is slightly smaller than that, but almost exactly the same. The wheelbase is 104.5 inches, and the suspension has 29 inches of usable travel. That's nuts. That is a lot. The shock absorbers automatically adjust to terrain, and you can do some driver adjustments if you want on the fly, but honestly my experience was if you just let the machine do it, the machine will do just fine on its own. It doesn't need you. That was pretty great. So then to the Pro S model. The Pro S has 181 horsepower, so that's about 40, I think, 40 less if I'm doing the math. It's a good amount of power. That's why I like this machine. It's a nice balance between the two ends. It's roughly the same size. Wheelbase is 96 inches, so a little bit smaller, but it's the same 74 inches in width. And otherwise, it is the same as the turbo model from last year. So as far as the engine, transmission, and other things, it's pretty much the same. What I liked the most about this Pro S is the way they've tuned it, the way they've changed it a little bit. I could tell in the previous turbo model that you could feel the turbo come in. You knew when it was happening, and if it wasn't so much that it was going to jerk and break your traction and stuff like some vehicles do. Talking to you, Ford Ranger, but it does. You do feel it. You do know it's happening. With this model, you know when it's happening if you're waiting for it. But otherwise, if you're not paying attention to wait for it to happen or to anticipate it happening, you won't realize it's happened. It just happens, and it's great. So you'll maybe hear it a little bit in the change in the engine tone, but otherwise you will not know that the turbo has just kicked in. And that's a really good thing, because nobody likes the jerkiness that they don't have control over. You want to be the one causing the jerks and the bounces and the hits because you're the one driving, not the machine just randomly doing it to you. And then last on the list with the XP, the cheapest and smallest and most different of the group. So with this Pro XP, it's only 64 inches wide, so it's much smaller than the other two in terms of width. That's, of course, like I said, by design. This is made for traversing terrain through trees and other rocks and other things, and doing a little more on the technical side of things. It's also less powerful, of course, and that's fine because this is not a high-speed machine. This is a machine made to go at a slower pace to do more technical articulation and riding. It is beautifully built for that. Out in the dunes, especially in the open areas, this was not a fun one to ride. It was fun if I didn't have the other two to compare it to, but because the other two were there, it was not nearly as fun. It was a very, very sluggish by comparison. But in the more technical parts, when we got into the trees, even though we were still in sand, we got into some trees to get around some things and stuff. This shined. The XP did beautifully there because you don't worry so much about hitting something. You have a much more positive carve when you're turning because smaller wheelbase, shorter track. So you carve through a little bit easier. It's a little easier to predict and anticipate the carve. So it was really good for that stuff. So all three of these machines are available from Polaris now. They are really, really good. They start at about $24,000 for the XP, and then you'll spend about $35,000 to get into the R, and then somewhere in between those for the S. So really nice lineup from Polaris here. These are great machines for anybody who's looking for a side-by-side. Yeah, so that was it. Went to Oregon, drove these, and now I'm telling you about it. So there you go. That's the new 2025 Polaris Pro lineup. This has been Aaron. Talk to you again soon.